Berlin, 1820. One lecture hall is packed, people standing in the aisles. In the room next door, a professor is lecturing to 4 students. A week later, 2. Then nobody shows up at all, and he's talking to an empty room. The full hall is there for Hegel. The empty one is Arthur Schopenhauer's, a man who understood how the human mind works more precisely than almost anyone who lived before him, and who, all the same, went unheard. He wasn't wrong. History settled that. Today, Hegel is mostly something you study at university. Schopenhauer is read by people looking for something real. But back then, in that room, he lost. And he lost for exactly this reason. He knew why people don't hear the truth, and he couldn't apply it to himself. That's what this whole conversation is about. Being right and being heard are 2 different skills. The world doesn't run on the laws of truth, it runs on the laws of perception. You think you're arguing with a person. What you're actually up against is their fear of being wrong, an old animal fear that sits deeper than any argument. And the rule here is brutal. The deeper you can think, the more often you walk away from an argument as the loser. You pour yourself into logic. You build the structure, line up examples, chase the truth. He spends nothing. He doesn't need to think. It's enough for him to feel right. You come out wrung dry. He didn't even notice there was a fight. A man doesn't want the truth. He wants his opinion to be the truth. Schopenhauer wrote. 200 years ago, he made a diagnosis that still hits the mark today. Will instead of reason. His main book is called The World as Will and Representation. The idea underneath it is simple and deeply uncomfortable. The world isn't driven by reason. It's driven by will, a blind, insatiable force with no goal. Hunger, fear, vanity, the need to be right, all of it is the same will, just wearing different costumes. And reason is its servant. Reason isn't there to find the truth, it's there to justify what the will has already decided. Look around, not to agree, just to check. When was the last time you saw someone genuinely change their mind because of a good argument? Not go quiet out of politeness, not back down just to end it, but actually reconsider their position on the inside. It happens, but less often than we'd like to believe, because an argument, most of the time, isn't a search for truth. It's a defense of territory. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman described 2 modes of thinking. The first is fast, automatic, emotional. It runs on its own, effortlessly, all the time. The second is slow, analytical, expensive in terms of energy. Most of their lives, people spend in the first. They feel, and they call it thinking. You come at someone's second system with an argument, and that system is either not well developed or already hijacked by the first. The first one decided in advance. This person is a threat to me. I don't like this idea. And now all that analytical power is working not for the truth, but to defend a decision that's already been made. A person doesn't separate himself from his beliefs. His opinion has become part of his identity. You argue with the idea, and he hears an attack on himself. From that point on, it's emotions running the show, not the brain. And everything you say passes through a filter of defense. He isn't listening. He's hunting for where you slipped, what to latch onto, how to twist your words. He needs to hold on to the feeling of being right. This isn't a dialogue anymore. It's a fight. Eristics, the art of winning even when you're wrong. There's a name for this. One, Schopenhauer gave it himself. Eristics, the art of winning an argument even when you're wrong. He laid out 38 tricks people use in debate, not to find the truth, but to win. And he wrote them down not as a manual for manipulators, as a warning for smart people. Look closely, and you'll see these tricks everywhere. People interrupt. They change the subject. They nitpick. They turn it emotional. They belittle. They laugh. They pretend they didn't understand. This isn't random noise. It's a strategy, often an unconscious one. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. That's not cynicism. It's just mechanics. From that follows a simple conclusion. When you lose to someone like this, you don't lose because your arguments are weaker. You're playing chess against someone who's convinced it's checkers. The rules are different. You burn yourself up building combinations. He just moves however he knows how and is perfectly happy. The harder you push with logic, the harder the resistance gets. You're not convincing him, you're backing him into a corner. And a person in a corner doesn't start thinking. He starts defending. That's why the most obvious things so often don't land. Not because they're complicated, but because people don't want to accept them. The truth is rarely rejected for being weak, more often for being inconvenient. The mirror people want to smash. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger gave students tests in logic and grammar, then asked them to rate their own results. The ones who did the worst consistently overrated themselves, sometimes seriously believing they'd beaten 8 people out of 10 while actually sitting in the bottom quarter. The conclusion is unpleasant. An incompetent person can't see his own incompetence, because seeing it would require the very skills he's missing. To notice what you don't know, you already have to know enough. Know a little, and everything looks simple. And that simplicity breeds confidence. Schopenhauer described this a century and a half before them, and he added something they missed. Next to mediocrity, a smart person becomes a threat. He isn't attacking, he's a mirror. Intellectual superiority gives offense by its very existence, he wrote. Picture someone who spent 20 years in one field and thinks of himself as an expert. Someone comes along and asks questions he's never once asked himself. No aggression, just genuine curiosity. And suddenly it's visible. What passed for expertise is a set of familiar motions with no real understanding underneath. What happens next? You rarely hear, "Oh, interesting, I never thought about that." More often, the person goes cold, starts looking for something to criticize, backs off to a distance. Someone who's seen in the mirror what he didn't want to see doesn't change. He smashes the mirror. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where you weren't pushing, weren't attacking, you just knew more, or saw deeper. And that alone became the reason for the conflict. Now add the crowd. People rarely come up with an opinion on their own. They absorb it from family, friends, the feed, the news, and then defend it as their own. Not because they checked it, but because it grew into their sense of self. The crowd gives you safety. Think like everyone else and you take no risk. You don't stick up above the line. You don't become a target. And then you show up with something different. Even calm, even peaceful. By the very fact that you're not like them, you're already a challenge. What irritates people isn't the argument. It's that someone nearby is making them doubt. And doubt is the ground shifting under your feet. The question, what if I've been wrong this whole time? Few people can stand that. It's easier to reject, to belittle, to shut down. Talking and thinking aren't the same. People aren't stupid in the plain sense. They have intelligence. They can count, build, analyze, work, but that's not thinking yet. Real thinking is the ability to doubt yourself, to reconsider, to give up what's familiar. And that hurts, and it takes a strength most people simply don't have. It's easier to grab a ready-made position, repeat it, defend it, and call it your own opinion. You see a man speaking confidently, loudly, with examples, and you think there's a mind in front of you. Often, what's in front of you is a well-rehearsed script. The words are there, the understanding isn't. Strip off the nice packaging, and there's nothing underneath. You start explaining. He starts answering. From the outside, a dialogue. Listen closely. 2 monologues. Each one waiting for his turn, each holding the line, nobody moving. You're not talking to a person. You're talking to his image of himself, to who he wants to seem like, to what he's afraid of losing. That's why arguments shatter not against logic, against fear, the turn everybody misses. And here's the thing most people skip past. Stop and ask yourself honestly, why are you even doing this? Why explain? Why prove? Why try to get through? If the answer is, so he'll understand, you've probably already lost. Understanding can't be forced onto someone. A person chooses it himself. If he's not ready, you can talk for an hour and get nowhere. And the real reason is usually deeper. You want to be acknowledged as right. You want your word to carry weight. You want to be taken seriously. And in that moment, you're no different from the person you're arguing with. You're defending territory too. Just your own. That's why these conversations are endless. There's no truth in them. There's a collision of 2 egos. One proves, the other digs in. Then they switch roles. The winner isn't the one who's right. The winner is the one who doesn't feel threatened. And Schopenhauer knew this. In theory, brilliantly. But in life, he threw himself into exactly these fights, over and over. His mother didn't mince words. In a letter, she told him straight, "You're impossible to live under one roof with. You make everyone around you miserable." He answered in a way that made her go silent for good, over 20 years, until her death, not a single line. A man who saw right through other people's defenses missed his own. His mother, Berlin, colleagues, he understood the mechanism and didn't apply it to himself. That doesn't make him a hypocrite, it makes him human. The most uncomfortable part, the one nobody talks about. Everything said above is easy to turn into a shield. Everyone around me isn't ready, nobody listens. And you shut down, calling it wisdom. Except that's not wisdom. It's the same trap, seen from the side. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't say stupid people overrate themselves. It says, in the areas where you have little knowledge, you overrate yourself. And everyone has areas like that, including very smart people. We just don't know where they are, by definition. Schopenhauer was a living illustration of this. He brilliantly understood the nature of the mind and was nearly blind when it came to his own relationships with people. There's a simple test. When was the last time you walked out of a conversation thinking, I think I was wrong? Not, I gave in to end it, but specifically, I was convinced. If that happens rarely, it doesn't mean you're always right. It means you have a blind spot. Schopenhauer called intellectual pride the most expensive kind of self-deception, precisely because it disguises itself as a virtue. Being smart feels like being correct. Being right feels like a merit. That's why the dependence on your own rightness is so hard to spot in yourself. There's only one defense against it: working doubt. Not the anxious, paralyzing kind, but the kind that calmly asks, what might I not be seeing? Where is my picture incomplete? Who knows more than me on this? Smart people are afraid of that question. It feels like admitting weakness. In reality, only someone who sees the edge of his own knowledge can step past it. Doubt is the foundation of confidence, not its opposite. How the people who really got this behave. Not in words, but in behavior. Not because they're weaker, because they see deeper. First, they vet the conversation before it even starts. One question before you open your mouth. What changes if this person understands me? If the answer is nothing meaningful, you already know what to do. Don't start. A smart person feels an almost physical itch to correct a mistake, to fix someone else's misconception. That's not nobility, it's a reflex, and a reflex can be trained. Wisdom is often knowing when the truth simply isn't needed. Second, they don't treat everyone the same, because people are different. There's the aggressively confident one, the person who doesn't know that he doesn't know. Read 3 articles and now he's got monetary policy figured out. Watched 1 documentary and he'll explain to you why the Roman Empire fell. Don't argue with him. Schopenhauer called this move reduction to absurdity. Reductio ad absurdum. Don't refute the position, accept it enthusiastically, and carry it to its logical end. He says modern art is a scam and anyone could do it? Don't lecture him on the history of painting. Say, exactly. Let's each paint one by Friday, sell them, and get rich. You're not hitting his position. You're carrying it to where it leads on its own. From there, he either accepts his own logic all the way through, or he starts adding qualifications. And the moment he starts qualifying, he's already arguing with himself. You walked away without breaking a sweat. He tied himself in knots. There's the emotionally charged one, the person whose position rests not on facts, but on feeling. Hurt, fear, belonging to a group, the belief has grown into his identity. Hit the belief, and he feels the hit landing on himself. Logic here isn't just useless, it's harmful. The better your argument, the stronger the pushback. 2 options. Work with the emotion, not the position, or just leave. Not because you've got nothing to say, but because there's no conversation here. There's his monologue, and you're needed as the audience. And there's the hardest case of all. Someone with real power over you, who makes decisions by the rules of the first 2 types. A boss, an official, someone your situation depends on. Here you can't just walk out, and a head-on argument threatens his status and turns you into a threat. The Chinese strategist Sima Yi, serving under the regent Cao Shuang in the Three Kingdoms era, solved this radically. When spies came to check whether he was dangerous, Sima Yi played a feeble old man, spilling his soup, mixing up names, acting half-deaf. The spies reported back. No threat. Cao Shuang relaxed, and a few months later, while he was away hunting, Sima Yi launched a coup. The regent lost his head. Literally. You could call this strategic incompetence. You pay with a small sting to someone's ego in exchange for freedom to act. Not because you're weak, because you understand where the real battlefield is. Third, they choose silence, and they know it isn't weakness. From the outside, silence reads as having no arguments, as losing. In reality, it's one of the strongest moves there is. You don't react, which means you don't enter the game. You don't hand him anything to grab. You don't feed the conflict. You leave the person alone with himself. And something strange happens. He was expecting resistance, and there isn't any. A system tuned for a fight doesn't know what to do because there's no fight. Not everything that happens demands your reaction, wrote Marcus Aurelius. Silence isn't an empty space where an answer should be. It's the choice not to spend yourself. Fourth, they don't try to change anyone's mind. It feels like if you're right, you're obligated to get it across. But under pressure, people don't change. They change only when they're ready themselves. And any attempt to convince is pressure, and pressure breeds pushback. Even with airtight logic, a person will cling to his position, because otherwise, he loses face. A smart person states his view calmly, clearly, without aggression, and stops there. No urge to hammer it home, no attachment to the outcome. If a person is ready, he'll get it from half a word. If he's not, he won't get it in an hour. Fifth, they choose distance on purpose. Schopenhauer has an image that became the most famous thing in his legacy, the hedgehog's dilemma. In winter, they huddle together to keep warm, prick each other with their quills, move apart, get cold, come back together. And in the end, they find the distance where there's both warmth and no pain. That's the model for a smart person's relationship with the world. Not isolation and not dissolving into the crowd, but a consciously chosen distance. There are people you're fully open with, where there's mutual give and take, a real exchange. There usually aren't many. There are people you're present with in body, but not in mind. Polite, even. Not carrying your real opinion into a place where it'll only be used against you. And there are people you simply keep contact with to a minimum, no explanation given. That's not arrogance, it's the distribution of the scarcest thing you have, attention and energy. And the main thing, you're not obligated to save everyone, not obligated to explain to everyone, not obligated to open the eyes of people who closed them themselves. That's not your job. Your job is to keep yourself intact. How he found peace. Schopenhauer spent most of his life alone, in Frankfurt. He talked to a poodle named Atma, in Sanskrit, world soul. He got along badly with people. But it was in that solitude that he said things no one before him had said so plainly. And the whole irony is that the man who catalogued 38 tricks of Eristics kept falling for them, again and again. The one who explained better than anyone why you shouldn't try to prove anything, kept trying to prove things to the very end. The hardest thing is to apply to yourself what you've understood about others. But toward the end, he seems to have found a balance. He corresponded with people who read him seriously. He received the rare guests who came with real questions. Every day he walked the same route, ate at the same restaurant, listened to Mozart, read Racine. Atma was there beside him. This isn't the portrait of an unhappy man. It's a man who finally found the right distance. He died in 1860, at 72, at breakfast, alone in his apartment. Not long before, fame had finally come. The World as Will and Representation was being reprinted. Newspapers were writing about him. Readers were showing up. 40 years earlier, the book had interested almost no one. He lived to see recognition. But more importantly, he stopped waiting for it in order to stop suffering. He simply stopped demanding understanding from people who couldn't give it. And in that refusal, not in resignation, but specifically in refusing the illusion, he found something close to peace. The tax you pay. Anger at other people's foolishness is a tax you pay to the very people you're angry at. In your time, your attention, your energy. And most of the time, those people don't even know you're angry. You suffer over someone else's stupidity, and instead of fighting it, you feed it with yourself. On the outside, it's long over, but inside you, it's still alive. Life is too short to spend on the useless, Seneca said. Arguments that lead nowhere are one of the most invisible leaks. Zero result, and they drain your energy. You come out tired, irritated, with the feeling that you weren't understood, and you want to either keep going or prove it even harder, and round it goes. Real intelligence isn't the number of your arguments or how nicely you can talk. It's the ability to stop in the exact moment you feel the pull to answer. When you're being provoked, when you've almost started proving your point, that's precisely where it's decided who you are. If you can be dragged into an empty argument and worked up emotionally, nothing else matters. In real life, what decides things isn't what you know, it's how you behave. You can read all the right philosophy, agree with every word, and still answer again, argue again, spend yourself again. Which means the knowledge is there, but the control isn't. And control isn't some abstract idea, it's a concrete action, or more precisely, the absence of one. Not answering, not engaging, not continuing. It sounds simple. In practice, it's one of the hardest skills there is. It runs against habit, against the ego, against the urge to prove. That's exactly why it separates the people who understood from the people who actually run themselves. You're not obligated to explain to everyone, not obligated to justify yourself, not obligated to prove you're right to people who aren't ready to hear it. Your zone of responsibility is your time, your energy, your attention. And when that really lands, everything changes. Every argument stops being a challenge. Every disagreement stops being a threat. You can state your opinion and not wait for an answer. Hear a no and not get worked up. See someone else's mistake and not rush to fix it. Not out of indifference, but because you know. Most people won't change from your words. They'll change only when they're ready themselves. The difference between the person who burns up over other people's stupidity and the person who moves forward in spite of it isn't intelligence. It's where he points his attention. Is there a person or a situation in your life where you're still trying to get through, even though you figured out long ago that it's pointless? Write it in the comments. I'm curious how universal this is. Sometimes the smartest answer is no answer at all. If this conversation landed for you, it'd mean a lot if you subscribed. There are no ads here, no loud slogans, no ready-made right answers, just calm, honest conversations about how we, as people, are actually put together, why we do what we do, and what to do about it in real life. What matters to me is that this stays a place to think, not one more stream of advice. And write me which topic to take on next, whatever's on your mind right now, or won't leave you alone. I really do want to hear from the people who watched to the end. It helps me understand what to talk about next.